Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. Honey, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time. Yeah. Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. All right. Sorry, ain't no music. I'm doing this for my cell phone in the bathroom. Because when I go Wi-Fi, it skips on my laptop. And I don't feel like sitting downstairs in the office. So we are at chapter 12, and the title is called The Mummy. Like Mummy. I wonder what that's about. The mummy? Like, a mummy. Oh, Lord. Here we go. We were living on Beneteau Street on the east side of Detroit. Like most kids, we loved to play outside. We had a used bike that someone gave to us. Mama couldn't afford to buy us a new one, so we all had to share the one bike. Bobby, Tommy, and I took turns riding back and forth to the end of the block. That was as far as Mama would allow us to go. She also instructed us to never talk to strangers. She'd remind us of this every time we went out to play. Don't talk to strangers, and if they say anything to you, run. This was especially directed to Tommy because he made friends with everybody. No one was a stranger to him. In every neighborhood we lived in, Tommy was the one everyone got to know first. On the other hand, Bobby wasn't friendly. If you weren't in the family, he wanted nothing to do with you. He stayed to himself and wasn't nice to the neighbors. He was mischievous, always doing things that kept the neighbors yelling and telling on him. He'd pick their flowers and throw rocks at their cars. His biggest thrill was to turn the water on at the side of their house and run. My girlfriends in the neighborhood weren't too fond of Bobby. He was always teasing and picking on them, playing tricks on them with his silly games. Most of the time, they refused to come play with me because they didn't want to be bothered with my brother. It didn't matter, though, because my best friends were my brothers. I had plenty of them, and we loved playing with each other. One day, we were outside taking turns riding our bike down to the corner. Now, to us, riding to the corner was far away. Since I was always cautious of strangers, if I saw someone I didn't know, I'd turn back and go the other way. Being that it was my turn to ride the bike, I was taking my time getting to the corner. I wanted to keep my turn on the bike as long as I could. Therefore, I was riding along, looking down at my feet on the paddles. I wasn't paying any attention to where I was going. Suddenly, the bike came to an abrupt stop. To my surprise, I'd run into someone, and the first thing I could see were their feet. As I raised my head, looking up from the ground, I saw this strange man with a bandage wrapped around his head. Then I looked at his arm, and it was bandaged and in a sling. My eyes shifted back to his face, which was completely wrapped in bandages, except for his eyes protruding through the eye holes. This was a stranger, unlike anyone that I knew. At first, I was frozen with fear. All I could think about was the monster movie we'd watch on television called The Mummy, who'd come back to life, walked a dragging one leg, and killed people in the night. We'd have nightmares about this movie. Now here it was right there before my eyes. And when I looked up from the ground, I saw this strange man wrapped up in the same cloth materials, just like the mummy. It was crazy, and I was terrified, speechless. All I could do was scream. I couldn't speak. And as I was turning my bike around, I dropped the bike and was getting ready to run. Suddenly, the strange man spoke. "Hey, sweetheart." He sounded like my daddy. Then he said, "It's Daddy, don't be afraid." I took a good look at the strange man one more time. He didn't look anything like my daddy. He looked like a mummy. And as I turned running down the street towards home yelling, "Mama, Mama, there's a monster coming up the street," the mummy kept saying that it was my daddy. By the time the mummy made it to the front door, all of us, Bobby, Tommy, and Randy, were crying and hanging on to Mama. She looked at the mummy at the door, and even though she could barely recognize him, seemed to believe it was Daddy. "Bob, is that you?" Trying to convince us who he was, Daddy put his arms around Mama and said, "It's me, Ederline." When we saw Mama accepted Daddy by putting her arms around him, we stopped crying. However, we weren't glad to see Daddy. He looked just like the mummy on television. With that being the case, we kept our distance and wondered what happened to him. Mama was concerned. She knew Daddy was hurt, and she immediately began to question him. "What happened to you?" "I was in a fight." And then she told us to go out and play. Later on, I heard the details when Mama was talking to Aunt Ernestine. Daddy had told Mama that 3 guys jumped him. They were black guys and he was robbed. Mama had no trust in what he told her. She believed he got jumped. That was obvious. But the part about being robbed, she wasn't so sure about. Whatever it was, Daddy was really hurt. He'd been hospitalized for a few days. Now he was back home, and Mama let him back in. She felt sorry for him. Ultimately, we found out his woman's family had beat Daddy up. The word was he was messing with her older daughter, and the girls told on him. His woman was smooth and kept it from him, acting like nothing was wrong. Once he left for work one morning, she moved to another house. Her brothers helped her move, then waited for him to come home. When he got home, they jumped him. Daddy couldn't tell her kids not to tell their mamas and daddy's business. After all, he wasn't their daddy. He was doing something he had no business doing. As a result, his woman got rid of him, and he was now back with us. Her family intervened by literally laying hands on Daddy, and they definitely weren't in the church like Mama's family. With that being the case, he could no longer live with them. At the end of the day, our boogeyman had returned to us, only this time he was dressed up like the mummy. I'm pausing because I'm realizing I knew a family like this. I knew a family where they had 10 children. And if you ask me, I think the father molested the daughters. I have strong suspicions, and I'm probably 100% right. But he would come and go. He had another family, other children. He used to beat up my friend's mother, whom he had 10 children with. And he was living for years with another woman, and he got sick with cancer. And then she sent him home to his wife, and his wife took care of him. until he died. She never wanted to divorce him. And I would say the mother and Mama Debarge most likely were in the same generation. And that's what they believed. They didn't believe in getting a divorce. And he would beat that woman. He would blacken her eyes. Be gone for weeks or a couple of months and come back and lay around the house for a couple of weeks or whatever. And she was okay with that. I mean, I'm trying to understand or grasp the thinking of those women. And I think the reasons why they did the things they did are multifaceted. I think the church had a lot to do with what they believed, as far as they didn't believe in divorce. They didn't believe in birth control, or maybe birth control was not advanced as it is these days. I think it's a combination of that. And they're coming out of a generation of women that, you couldn't do anything unless you had a husband. You couldn't even walk down the street as a single woman. You had to be married and walk down the street with your husband. You couldn't buy a car. Your husband had to buy the car. You couldn't get any credit. You couldn't buy a house. The man had to buy the house. So society was geared to have women totally dependent on men. And when I speak like this, please don't get me wrong and act as if I got something against men and I dislike men. No, that's not it at all. I'm just taking you back how it was then. I remember my aunt, whom she met my uncle. They were 14 years old. They were married 61 years before he passed. They still held hands. They still smooched. I mean, it was really a love. They traveled around the world together. But even she told me not to get married. She said women today don't need to get married. And again, she said, in my day, and I believe she was born in like 1933, you had to get married. And she said if she was a young adult or whatever in these days and times, she would never get married. That's not to say she resented her life, because she had a wonderful life with her husband. But this was the advice that she told me. And so we sit back and say, why didn't she leave? Why she keep letting them back in? Their mentality in those days was close to, they had no other choice. That was their husband. I don't know. I'm just trying to make sense of it, and it still might not make any sense at all. But I'll just say I'm glad I wasn't born in those days. Thank God. Chapter 13, Turn the Other Cheek. Mama's friends in the neighborhood thought she was crazy. They couldn't understand why she stayed with Daddy. So that wasn't a common thought or anything, or a common behavior. If friends in the neighborhood was like, that bitch crazy, They couldn't understand why she stayed with Daddy. He only stayed around the house long enough to get better. Then he was off on a binge again, indulging in his drinking and messing around. They tell her she was too good for him and she needed to put him out. They felt she was being taken advantage of and knew that all she did was go to church. She was very timid and naive to things of the world. Mama was a soft-hearted person and people saw that as a weakness. Unfortunately, many of their children thought the same way as their parents did. We'd get picked on in school and we were often called half-breeds. They'd push on us, pull our hair, and tease us, saying, "You got a white daddy and a black mama." And we felt defenseless, not having anything to say. We were ashamed of who we were and couldn't even fight back because mama taught us to turn the other cheek. So we'd never defend ourselves and hit back. We just walk with our heads down, never looking anyone in their face. At home, we were afraid of Daddy, while at school, we were afraid of the students. Furthermore, when we went out to play, we were afraid of our neighbors. We didn't feel like we fit in anywhere except with Mama's family. And we'd be glad when our cousins came over because they'd fight our battles. We hated who we were and often wondered, why did Mama have to marry Daddy? Well, that's a damn fucking shame. Everywhere you go, you living in fear. Can't go to school. Can't go outside your house and play because you scared like shit. And also, I'm surprised they weren't, you know, treated like royalty because they were mulatto. In my generation, mulatto people were treated better. So it seemed they wasn't picked on. I never even thought that was ever possible, but okay. It was 1963 and we were now living on Harding Street. Mama finally had enough of Daddy and we moved without him. However, after their breakup, Mama found out that she was pregnant again. Daddy got an apartment on the other side of town. He was working, but he got a roommate to help him out with the rent. My brother Tommy, who was in the first grade, went to school and told his teacher that his daddy had died in a car accident. She believed Tommy. Why would a child tell such a lie? The school sent flowers and a card home stating how sorry they were to hear our family had suffered a loss. Mama was shocked that Tommy would make up such a lie, causing the teacher and her to be concerned. After all, Tommy was only 6 years old at the time. Children make up stories, but not like that. Our daddy was very much alive. He was driving a big truck for a company. And when my mother told him that what Tommy had done, it seemed to hurt him. He thought maybe he should come around more and spend some time with us. We were amazed with the big truck he drove, so he made plans to come take us for a ride. We all got a turn to ride in the truck with him alone. This excited us and made us feel like we were special. Daddy was doing something that was nice for his children. Now, Tommy had something to brag about at school. We'd brag about what Tommy had done to our friends and teachers. Furthermore, when our cousins would come over, we'd have something to tell them. It was something they'd never experienced before. Then Daddy started spending the nights. It was on Mama's terms, and when she was tired of him, she'd send him home. He'd also babysit us sometimes when she'd go to church. I don't know what their terms were, but it seemed to be mutual. I think Mama missed him sometimes, and she wanted him to have a relationship with the boys. I'd often hear her say, "The boys need their father." Daddy was trying to step up, no matter where they were in their marriage. Mama wouldn't get a divorce. She still had hope for their future. Chapter 14, Secrets. There were 6 of us now, and we were living in a 3-bedroom house. I slept with Mama when Daddy wasn't around. When he come home, I sleep in the room with the boys. After we were in bed, Daddy would come and check on us and kiss us all good night. One night, it went a little further than a kiss. He put his hands in my private place and fondled me. I pretended to be asleep as he took my brother and placed him on top of me. What was he doing, I thought? What does this mean? As soon as he left, I pushed my brother off me. I was old enough, 8 years old to be exact, to know Daddy was wrong. And he had no business touching me. I didn't know what to do. I dared not tell Mama. I tried that before when I told her about the babysitter. Nothing was resolved, and we both got a whipping. I was hoping maybe this would never happen again. On another occasion, Mama had gone to evening church service. We were all watching television with Daddy, and we were lying under our blankets on the floor. Daddy called me over to sit on his lap, so I brought my blanket with me. I didn't think anything of it. It was nothing more than a little girl sitting on her father's lap. He wrapped the blanket around us, saying he was cold and wanted to share my blanket. Then I felt his hands on me, touching me, down where no one was supposed to touch. I tried to move around. I even tried to get down, but he held his arms around me and continued to fondle me. Ugh. I squirmed to indicate I was uncomfortable, but I didn't speak a word. I didn't know what he'd do, so I sat there until it was done. Daddy looked at me, put his finger to his mouth, and quietly said, "Shh, don't tell anyone. Don't you tell a soul." From that day on, I hated when Mama would leave me. I wanted so badly to tell her what was happening to me, but I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell anyone. I was too afraid. I couldn't tell my grandma. She was too sick. It would worry her something terrible. I felt she was already in California because of stress, and I didn't want to worry her more. If I told Mama, she'd tell Daddy, and he'd never admit it was true. He'd say in my face I was lying, or I dreamed the whole thing. I knew she was afraid of him. How could she help me? So I kept it to myself, praying that he'd stop, or that she'd take me with her. I didn't want to stay with Daddy anymore. Things began to escalate, and so did my fears. Now it was happening when Mama was around. She'd be asleep or in another room. He'd tell me not to tell her. This had become his favorite words to say. It was either that, or sometimes he'd just say he was sorry. However, I felt like he couldn't help himself because he'd always do it again. Finally, I just stopped believing him, and he stopped saying it. I felt so alone, not being able to tell anyone. I felt isolated, not being able to say how it made me feel. I was embarrassed, felt violated, and was so terrified. I felt guilty for something that wasn't even my fault. I often wondered if this was happening to me, was it happening to anyone else? When I'd see other little girls interacting with their dads, I'd wonder, did their daddies touch them too while they sat on their laps? I dare not ask them. It was too much of a risk. Here I was, keeping a secret that was tearing me up inside, but I dare not tell anyone. I didn't want to be told I was telling a lie. Chapter 15. Can I get a witness? Mama had friends in the neighborhood that she'd witnessed to from time to time, talking about the Lord and inviting them to church. Now, when Daddy was around, he had his own way of witnessing to them. However, it wasn't about God. It would ultimately be about trying to get them into bed. A few weeks later, a woman named Vicky moved into our neighborhood, directly behind us and across the alley. She was much younger than Mama, so right away Mama took her in as a friend and began witnessing to her. She heard about my parents through the gossip in the neighborhood. In addition, she heard about the flirt Daddy was and how he was in and out of Mama's life. Although we were poor ourselves, Miss Vicky seemed to be less fortunate than we were. She had 3 children, and one of them was a little girl who was younger than I was. Miss Vicky wanted to know how Mama managed things having all the children she had. Naturally, Mama saw this as an opportunity to inform a young woman of where her help came from. God helps me, girl, Mama said. I don't know what I'd do without him. They went on talking as we played, and before I knew it, Mama had talked Miss Vicky into coming to church with us. Miss Vicky said she'd go, but she didn't have any dress shoes for her daughter to wear. Mama had just got me a pair of black patent leather shoes that I loved. However, they were a little tight on my feet. She promised me we were going to take them back to exchange them whenever she got a ride. When I overheard Mama asking her what size shoe her little girl wore, I knew just where she was going with this. I knew my Mama. She was so kind-hearted. We weren't taking those shoes back to the store. She was going to give them to Vicky's little girl. And as fate would have it, the little girl fit my shoes to a T. Of course, I didn't like that she was giving my shoes to her. In my world, it didn't matter that I couldn't fit them. I didn't care if I'd get a blister. I wanted those shoes. Later, Mama told me I should be ashamed of myself. She went on to convince me that God would bless me with some more shoes. So on Sunday, Miss Vicky and her kids went to church with us. She truly seemed to enjoy the service, promising Mama she'd come with her again. Now, a couple of days later, Bobby and I were walking through the alley and noticed Daddy's car. There it was, sitting on the side of the garage, right behind Miss Vicky's house. Of course, we ran home to tell Mama. Is Daddy home? Because we saw his car parked in the alley. We thought Daddy had come home while we were out playing. Mama seemed surprised as she asked us where we'd seen his car parked. We repeated, it's in the alley, Mama, right in back of your friend Miss Vicky's house. With that, Mama walked to the back of the alley to see if it was really Daddy's car. She looked upset as she told me and Bobby to go up to Miss Vicky's door and ask if our Daddy was there. We went through the alley, climbing the stairs to knock on her back door. As we got closer to the door, before we could even knock, we could hear Daddy talking. He's in there, I said. After we knocked, the house became quiet. We could hear them whispering, so we knocked again. We could hear footsteps coming towards the door. Miss Vicky inquired, who is it? I responded, is our Daddy there? She barely opened the door just enough where we could only see her face. Excuse me? She shot back to us with an attitude. Is your Daddy here? What makes you think he's here at my house? And then she lied straight-faced and said, no, I haven't seen your Daddy. I became a little indignant with her and retorted, well, his car's behind your house in the alley, so we thought he was here. She looked us up and down and said, well, he isn't here, so go back and tell your mother I don't appreciate her sending you all over here to question me. Tell her to be a woman and come see for herself. With that, she abruptly closed the door. Like kids, we immediately stuck our tongues out at her. We didn't like her attitude. We knew Daddy was there. We heard him. In retaliation, Bobby dug in his nose and wiped a booger on her door. We both laughed and chuckled as we went back down the stairs, rushing home to tell Mama what we heard. I was mad at Miss Vicky and Daddy, My mind racing back to my shoes Mama had given her for her little girl. On top of that, Mama thought Miss Vicky was her friend, so this obviously hurt her even more. However, she went on believing in her God. It didn't stop her from going to church or witnessing to people. Of course, Daddy never admitted to being over to Miss Vicky's house, but Mama and I knew better. He left her house while we were all asleep, and like usual, we didn't see him for a while. I need to see a picture of their father. Was he handsome or something? Ow! He just slinging dick all through the neighborhood, across the street, across the back alley, whole other family a block away. What the fuck? Did he have a diamond hanging off the end of it? Was it made of gold? Inquiring minds want to know. Mama knew there was really nothing she could do about it. They were separated. She could ask him about it when she saw him again, but like she already knew, he'd come up with a lie. Therefore, she just left it alone. As far as I knew, she never said anything about it again. The little bit of help she was getting from Daddy mattered at the time. She needed it. Why stress on something he'd never admit? Furthermore, it seemed to her that they got along much better without him permanently living with us. She still loved him, but she'd rather not know what he was doing when he was away. Mama hid her pain and just went on with her life. Chapter 16. Where there's a will, there's a way. I wondered how Mama imagined her marriage to Daddy to be. She had to believe they'd be happy, prosperous, own a nice home and car. I'm sure she entertained all these thoughts before marrying him, just like any young woman desires from whom they choose to marry. Maybe she thought she'd have the extra benefits by marrying a white man. After all, this was a time when white people had it much better than blacks did. My mama was poor when she was a child. Being in an 11-child household, she wore hand-me-downs and the whole 9 yards. In spite of such humble beginnings, I don't think she envisioned herself being on welfare, poor, and having to raise a house full of children alone. She couldn't afford to buy all of her children new clothes. When she did have extra money, she'd go to rummage sales to buy our school and church clothes. I remember her waking up early in the morning before the sun would come up, having saved her extra change to take the city bus. Sometimes she'd take Bobby and me with her, while Uncle James, her younger brother, would watch the younger kids. The boys loved Uncle James because when he was there, he'd spend a lot of time with them. Uncle James was a singer and had left the church to pursue a music career. He wanted to be a recording star, and the group that he sang with was known as the Four Tops. Wow. However, he was a church boy, and life seemed to be going a little too fast for him out in the world. As a result, he started experimenting with drugs, smoking weed every time he and his friends would get together. One day, Uncle James bought some bad weed. It took him on a pretty bad trip and scared him. He promised the Lord that when he came down from that high, he'd never do it again. He knew about the Lord, but Mama still would witness to him. There's no one like the Lord, she said. He chastises those he loves and is going to chase you until you come home, James. God wants to use your talents for him. Give your life back to Jesus. He'll bless you with much more. He listened to Mama. However, that day he listened even more. He was tired of the worldly life and wanted something different, something real. So that Sunday, Uncle James went to church with Mama and gave his life back to the Lord. For a while, he came to live with us and was a great help to Mama with the boys. Early one morning, Mama took me and Bobby with her to catch the bus and go to the rummage sale. She needed our help since she was big with this pregnancy and couldn't move around comfortably like she was used to. At the sales, we learned you better be quick if you wanted to get the good things. When we got there, it was still dark outside, and there was a long line outside the door. It was a storefront building that had stairs that led down to the basement. Rich and well-to-do people would donate their used clothes and items. Even though the doors to the sale opened at 9 o'clock, we were there at 8 to stand in the long line. When the doors opened, we had to go for it. Since Mama couldn't run, she told us to get a box and put everything we could grab in it. Grab it all and we'll sort it later, she directed us. You could hear the excitement of the crowd, and everyone rushed in doing the same thing Mama told us to do. We grabbed the baby clothes as well as the clothes for ourselves. We knew nothing about being ashamed of getting secondhand clothes. In fact, it was a lot of fun to us. We were simply glad that we had the chance to ride the big city bus. Moreover, it was fun to get away from the neighborhood. In our world, we were with our mama, and this made us happy. She had a way of making things fun whenever we were alone with her. She joked and played with us all the time. Mama was a friend. Sometimes we wouldn't take her serious, and she'd have to tell us several times, "I'm serious now." I loved her spirit because she wasn't one to let things get her down. Mama always had this confidence about her. Where there's a will, there's a way. All right. That is it. I have read chapter 12 through 16. Hello, hello. Hey, James. Hey, Katrina. How you doing? Good to see all of you. I think I want to end it here because it's on an up note. From Mama's Bed to Mama's Songs is chapter 17. I just don't want it to end this reading on something depressing. So I'll stop here. It's left on a high note. Because them low notes with this family, they really, really low, aren't they? All right. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please donate to Madam Whip-Ass on the $ Cash App. All donations will go towards a new stainless steel cage for Jumanji and Diva. They will greatly appreciate it. And please only donate if you are really enjoying these book readings. I appreciate you all, whether you choose to donate or not. It's all good in the hood. Thank you for stopping by, and peace.